everybody. Thanks for being here. I know it takes a lot for parents to carve out a slice of time to be here, so I really appreciate it. I'm Jen Lilienstein. I'm the author of the Parents Playbook for Learning, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, and I'm also the founder of Kidsmint.com. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is the 8 types of learners. I think a lot of us understand as adults that, personality type really matters when you're choosing a spouse, or when you're choosing a career, or even when you're choosing your friends. And we all acknowledge that it's important in this phase of our life. But what we don't always acknowledge as much is that personality type really matters when you're a kid as well. And it matters in learning. It matters whether or not you're talking about a teacher and student relationship, or a parent to student relationship, or even student teams. So what we're going to be talking about tonight and what you're going to be discovering is your child's personality type and how that personality impacts the ways that they learn best. Even Harvard's Mind, Brain, and Education Division director is saying that different kids learn differently. He said this in June 2012 in Education Week. And what he's saying is no different than what learning theorists have said for decades, and nearly almost a century. Everyone from Piaget to Vygotsky to Christensen and Myers-Briggs, all these names that you've heard for a really long time are all saying the same thing, that different kids learn differently. And when we start talking about how differently, well, it's a lot like that old story of the elephant that we used to hear as kids, where all the blind men are feeling the different parts of the elephant, and because it's such a big animal, they're all feeling different parts and thinking, oh, it's more of a spear, oh, it's more of a fan, oh, it's more of a rope, when really they're just approaching the concept differently. And this is the same thing that happens in a classroom setting when you're approaching new concepts as a kid. And why it's important for parents to know all of this, we've been talking about how everyone approaches these concepts differently, but a lot of parents that I talk to say, well, Jen, why is this important to me? I'm the parent, I'm at home, I make sure that they're doing their homework, but I don't necessarily have any kind of part of the educational experience at all. And really, what studies are finding, as far back as 2002, SEDL found that a parent's involvement in their child's education has been shown to positively impact the child's behavior or feelings about school and learning. But as recently as last October, October 2012, North Carolina State, BYU, and UCI down in Southern California found that parental involvement is actually a more significant factor in a child's academic performance than the qualities of the school itself. So we'll pore over real estate listings and say, okay, well, what kind of school district is this in? What do their API scores look like? Is this really a place where I want to be putting my child? When really we should be looking inside the home, because that parental involvement is really the key to academic success. And so that's what we're going to be learning a little bit about tonight. If you have any other further questions, obviously, you can go ahead and check out my book. But hopefully this will give you at least 5 or 6 things to start trying immediately, as soon as tonight, if you'd like, with your kids. So all of you have this little sheet in front of you. It will help us decide what type of learner your child is. They all have these icons on them, and they all have 3 boxes. Now, for anybody who's familiar with personality type already, you may be wondering, why are there only 3 boxes rather than the 4 that I'm used to for Myers-Briggs? For instance, I'm an INFP. So people get confused why there are only 3 versus 4. Well, really because in elementary school, and really a little bit into junior high, kids have only developed one of the 2 middle processes, because this is called your dominant, and once it comes to Myers-Briggs, it's your auxiliary process. So they're either going to be a thinker, a feeler, a sensor, or an intuitive, not a combination of 2 of those. So, and really it's important for us for our whole lives to know what your dominant process is, because it tells you what your weakest process is as well. So you're learning to play to your strengths as well as acknowledge your weakness. So it's often the other side of that dichotomy that you have the hardest time with, and will continue to have the hardest time with throughout your life. So what we're going to look at first is we're going to look at extroversion versus introversion. And what a lot of parents think is that if their child is really talkative or likes to be around other people or doesn't seem to have much of a problem talking to new people, that they're automatically an extrovert. When really, it's more of where they gain their energy from. So if they seem to get really energized after being around kids all day, or like being in a school setting, and then they want to be around more kids after school, then that's often a better clue for you versus if they talk your ear off when they're one-on-one with you at home and they're already really comfortable with you. Your introverts will look a lot more like these guys. They'll want to be spending more alone time really in reflection and thinking, whereas the extroverts learn a lot more from their discussion and their interaction. So that's a difference in the ways that they learn. So if you have an idea of which one your child is, then go ahead and put it in that first box here. It'll either be an E or an I. The next thing we're going to look at is judging versus perceiving. And that's this last character here. So you're going to be looking at your third box next. And really, this is what I like to call the tortoises versus the hares of the world. You know, we all talk about that tortoise and the hare story and say, oh, the hare was really worse off in that particular context. Well, yes, but if the hare had gone at the pace that he could through the whole race, then he would have won in a heartbeat. It's really more of the hare acknowledging his weakness for time management and his strength in being energized by the looming deadline versus the tortoise, who really has a real gift for time management, but may have more of a challenge with spontaneity and adaptability. So when we're talking about your J versus P here at the end, your judgers are the ones who like to have planned birthday parties. They like more to color within the lines and know the direction that they're going and how to get there from here. Whereas the perceivers tend to be more the ones who like to be more in the possibilities of things. They like to not make decisions until the last minute most of the time. They often combine work with play. The judgers, on another hand, like to do their work first and then play and separate them out, whereas the perceivers like to combine them both together. And they're the ones who are most often wanting more of a surprise party and not to know what they're going to do until the last minute. A lot of times we talk about Halloween costumes, and you know, your judgers are the ones, like my son, who you ask them in September what they're going to be for Halloween, they know, and they are that all the way until Halloween, and they're that on Halloween, whatever they choose to be. Whereas the perceivers, who are more like my daughter, they'll change their minds all the way up until the last minute. And for instance, last Halloween with Lana, she changed her costume 4 times on Halloween because she wanted to be all these different things and couldn't make up her mind until the last minute. So when you're deciding judger versus perceiver, go ahead and put it in this last box here. Now, if you've got an E here and a J here, or an I here and a P here, this question is going to be for you. If you've got an EP or an IJ, we're going to wait until the next question. So for kids that have EJ or IP personality types, this last box is going to be filled by either a T or an F. So either a thinking or a feeling. And a lot of times parents really get this because, you know, your thinkers are the ones who like to take emotion out of the equation, whereas your feelers are more feel that emotion is a really important part of the equation. They're the ones who tend to gravitate toward more artistic pursuits. They tend to be a lot more compatible with animals, more snuggly. They're a lot more concerned about how what they're doing affects people versus your thinkers, who think much more in the context of this cause leads to this effect. So it's not, they're taking the who out of the equation altogether, and it's more of a why or a what happens. And again, they tend to take emotion out of the equation. They're the ones who tend to like more analytical pursuits, things that really level the playing field and don't take the human element into consideration as much. Doesn't mean they're not loving. They can be really loving kids. They think a little bit differently, and everything has to be analyzed, and really it's more of a binary answer. It's either you go this way or you go this way. So once you've decided, go ahead and put that in for the middle character, whichever one it is for your child. And now for the rest of you, the parents that have either an EP kid or an IJ kid, we're going to be looking at sensing versus intuiting, which is an S versus an N. And your sensors are the ones who are a lot more interested in the practical applications of things, and what they can see and smell and touch and taste and feel. They're a lot more interested in the step-by-step kinds of instructions, and they're very detail-oriented. I like to think of them as being more of your tree trimmers, whereas your intuitives are much more of your forest rangers. So they think much more big picture and more envisioning and brainstorming and possibilities, and they just have a larger scope on life. So if you're looking at a concept, your sensors are going to be the ones that really zoom into that concept, whereas your intuitives are going to be the ones that zoom out and see where that concept belongs in a larger context. So this is one of the ones that you're going to take a look at for if you've got an IJ kid or an EP kid. And now that you've got all three of those characters in your boxes, you've identified which of the 8 types of learners each of your kids is. Your extroverted feelers, EFJs, extroverted sensors, ESPs, extroverted thinkers, ETJs, extroverted intuitives, ENPs, introverted feelers, IFPs, introverted sensors, ISJs, introverted thinkers, ITPs, introverted intuitives, INJs. And these icons you're going to see throughout the rest of the presentation, because they're going to clue you into exactly which techniques you want to use with your types of learners. So what we're going to talk about first is some of that hare versus tortoise thing that happens in life. And we're going to talk about it in the context of organization and time management. Now your perceiving kids, which are your IFPs, your introverted feelers, your extroverted sensors, your introverted thinkers, and your extroverted intuitives, they do best with homework inboxes. They like to know how much they've got on their plate ahead of time, because they really do thrive under the pressure of a looming deadline. They also do much better if you're keeping everything in view. These are the kids who are more out of sight, out of mind. So you want to make sure that you've got an organizer for them where they can see everything that they've got. Dry erase boards and project trees work really well for them. I've got an extroverted intuitive, and I happen to be a perceiver as well. And what works really well for me is when I draw a tree trunk with 4 or 5 branches on it. My main idea and what I'm going to be talking about goes on the trunk, and then some of the supporting points go on those branches. And then as I come up with ideas to support each of those areas, I'll take a Post-it note and I'll write something down on it and stick it on the dry erase board. And what that helps me do is make sure that I'm not forgetting all of the ideas that are coming into my mind as I'm going through it, but I'm sticking them all up there so that way, as that looming deadline comes closer and closer, I can go ahead and collect everything that I've thought about so far, figure out what I want to weed out and what direction my paper is really going to go, or my book is really going to go, or my project's really going to go. So project trees can be enormously effective for kids like that, and there's an example of that in the book. The other thing is that perceiving kids work really well with an at-a-glance calendar. So where they can see what's coming up, and they can see sort of the big picture of, okay, well, I've got this due on that day, and this due on that day, and this due on that day, so that they can start to feel the deadline approaching. They also do much better if they're prioritizing homework by what will take longest first and what can get done quickly last. And as a parent, one of the things that can be really effective is to help them create short-term deadlines. For instance, you know, I think you should have a first draft into your teacher by X date. Let's go ahead and set up a meeting so that way they can take a look at it beforehand, so that way they've got the energy of multiple pressing deadlines versus just one at the end, because one of their strengths is not time management. So whatever you can do to help them learn techniques to create better time management for themselves while still acknowledging and embracing their personality type, you're going to be much better off. For judging kids, it's really the opposite. They thrive on having a homework out box versus a homework in box. If you've got a homework inbox with a stack of papers in it, they tend to be the kids who get overwhelmed and say, oh my gosh, I've got so much ahead of me, how am I going to get all that done? Whereas if they've got the outbox, they're crossing things off the list. And they're putting it over there and feeling really good about how much they've already gotten accomplished. And so that feels a lot better for them. They're also the kids who like clutter-free workspaces better. They tend to be the ones who clear off their desk with everything other than a pencil and a piece of paper and a book. And that's all that they've got on there. And they really like to tackle their homework assignments one at a time rather than feeling like all of them are there at once. So whatever you can do to help them create a clutter-free workspace is fantastic. A lot of times what I like to suggest is having everything in an accordion file or in a trapper keeper kind of thing for their backpacks, so that way they're just pulling out one thing at a time, putting it in the outbox, and then they can refile it at the end. They also do much better with project ladders. So rather than a project tree where you've got sort of the big picture concepts of everything at the beginning and you're just kind of filling in the blanks, they do much better with project ladders, which are more like anyone who's used Microsoft Project in the past. It's much more of a timeline than a bigger idea kind of thing. So they'll say, okay, well, this is when my homework is ultimately due, or this is when my assignment is ultimately due. These are the interim steps that I need to take beforehand. This is about how much time I need for each of those interim steps. And then when they hit those ladder rungs, if they hit it early, then they can feel really good about it. But if they've hit it late, then they can look at what's coming next on their project ladder and where they can squish the time. That's a much more effective technique for them, and one, again, that will serve them extremely well from the classroom all the way to the boardroom. These are also the kids who do much better with a day timer. Day timers where they have, and what I like to suggest also is to take some of those Avery labels and print out their chore list, their daily chore list on the Avery labels and stick it in their day timers, because these kids are the ones who love crossing things off the list. They love feeling like they're getting everything done. And to that same end, judging kids really delight in that destination. So whatever you can do to prioritize daily homework and chores by what can get done fast first is going to work better for these kids. It's completely the opposite to the perceivers. So that your still to-do list is shrinking really quickly. That makes them feel a lot better. And again, they have that gift for time management. So the longer projects, they're going to make sure that they've got enough time for it. It's just in their nature. Now your first character, the E or I, is going to be your extroverted versus introverted. And this plays a much bigger role in terms of how you're going to approach new concepts. And I think a lot of you who work in business settings at all will acknowledge that, you know, there are the people in the room that really crave that interaction and discussion, and they tend to almost talk in layers over each other as they're getting a full picture. It's the way that I like to describe it is that you've got different lights going on in the room, and they're all going on at different times so that you can get a clearer picture of what's going on. And that's the way that extroverts think. They think out loud. So in order to get extroverted kids excited about a subject, talk to them about it before sending them into the solo zone to do homework. You know, a lot of us, especially introverts, tend to think about homework and say, okay, we'll just go off to the solo zone on your own, get your homework done, I'll take a look at it after you're done, and then we'll work through any issues that you may have. But for extroverts, what works really well for them and what really gets their creative juices flowing or their brains going is to really talk about it first. It doesn't mean you have to do the assignment for them. It doesn't even mean you have to give them any clues to it. You can just talk about what they've got coming up for homework. And as they start to talk to you about it, they will be thinking out loud and their brains will start to go the way that they need it to go. If you want to put in a couple of comments or a couple of questions, then obviously that'll help them more. Again, doesn't mean doing the assignment, it just means that they are getting a little bit more involved with you and talking things out. Introverts, on the other hand, really crave that reflection and private consideration when they're learning new things. So in order to get your introverted kids excited about a subject, talk to them about it one-on-one after they've had time in that solo zone. After they've had time to really kind of digest and reflect and think about what they're learning first before they talk to you about it, because they really want to get a clear understanding for themselves before they start to offer it out to the world. A lot of teachers nowadays are talking about flipped classrooms. Flipped classrooms in the traditional sense are phenomenal for introverted kids, because what it allows them to do is hear the teacher's lecture at home on video and really think about it and really digest it before they come into the classroom the next day to interact with other students in project-based learning. And so they feel much more confident in their ability to have those discussions and have those kinds of conversations because they've thought about it first. So if you've got an introverted child and your teacher has talked about a flipped classroom, you can be really excited about it. If you've got an extroverted kid, on the other hand, what can help is to bring another extroverted kid over so that as the teacher is talking about it on video, they can be talking to each other about it too and kind of cementing their understanding that way. So that's one of the ways to tackle it if you've got a flipped classroom and an extrovert. But no matter what type your kids are, whatever you can do to draw parallels between what they're learning and what they love will help. And this is incredibly important to share with teachers. Share with them what your kids love. Share with them what your kids hate. If your kid is not a musical kid and their teacher knows it at the beginning of the year, they're going to be thinking of other techniques and other mnemonics to help them remember things other than songs in class. There are so many songs that we use to remember things, but if you don't have a musical kid, then the old Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas song is just not going to do it for them in terms of learning where they are. If they're more of a visual spatial kid, then that map where you're placing all of the states is going to be a lot more effective for them. Translating assignments, and this can be a challenge, but this is one of the most important things you're going to help them do as a parent at home. Your teachers are going to be sending home assignments, and some of them are going to click for your kids, and some of them are not. And part of that is in the words that the teachers are using. So it's a lot like, I think of teaching and of assignments, a lot as marketing. And if you've been in a room with other marketers ever in a business setting, then you know that those word choices and tweaking those words really makes an impact on your target audience. And your target audience in this sense is your child. And you're trying to get them to buy off on the assignment. So if you can tweak the words in the teacher's assignment so that you can, for thinkers, you can help them more avoid words like express and cooperate and contribute and suggest and reflect and feel, and translate them into words that are a lot more along the lines of critique and generate and synthesize and examine and systematize and compute. This is going to be an assignment that turns your child on. This is going to be an assignment that turns your child off. So if you can help them in that context, that's phenomenal. And for feelers, it's exactly the opposite. So you're going to want to use more words like cooperate and contribute and collaborate and suggest and reflect and feel. That's going to be a much more exciting and engaging assignment for them, as opposed to critique and synthesize and systematize. There are a lot more words that we go over in the book, so if you want to take a look at them after we're done here, you feel free. But this is one of the most powerful parts that you can take a look at for your kids and what you can help them with. It'll make their assignments much richer and more compelling because they'll be playing to their strengths as well, and avoiding some of their their weaker thought processes. For your sensors, it's a lot more along the lines of practice and define and simplify and detail and build and list and review. So again, kind of, if you think about it with pictures, increase the DPI on it, get more of the detail in there. You're going to want to avoid words like elaborate or discover or brainstorm or imagine or just, develop or explore. Those are not words that necessarily turn them on in the same way. If any of these are used with your thinkers or feelers, it doesn't really matter. They can play both sides of the fence a lot better. Just the same way that with your sensors and intuitives, those thinking versus feeling differences, they don't make so much of a difference. It's these terms that really make much more of a difference for them. And again, for intuitives, it's going to be flopped. Your intuitives, you want to think bigger picture and elaborate, discover, create, brainstorm, imagine, develop, explore. And you're going to want to avoid a lot more of the detail and the granular words. So whatever you can do in that respect is fantastic. Always a good idea to ask the teacher and make sure that the way that you've redefined their assignment will still work for them. It's a good idea in general to have close communication with your teacher. It's something that I talk about a lot, but you and your teacher and your child are all members of the same learning team, so you can't really think of any of you as being on opposite sides of the fence. You're all working to help your child learn how to learn better and be more successful in life. There's not a teacher out there that doesn't want kids to be successful. Some of them have a harder time figuring out how to do it. So if you can help them along the way and say, these are really my child's strengths, how about if we tailor or tweak some lessons along these lines? I'm not changing your assignment at all, I'm just having them look at the picture a little bit differently. Most of them are open to it. A lot of times I like to think about the different types of learners as the different sides of a Rubik's Cube. You've got your core concept here in the middle of the Rubik's Cube, and you've got your thinkers looking at it from this direction, and your feelers looking at it from this direction, and your sensors looking at it from this direction, and your intuitives looking at it from that direction. So they're all seeing different sides of the elephant. Where this comes into play often is in study groups. And so at an intro level, like we talked about a little bit ago, when you're just starting to learn a concept, if you're seeking out kids with the same extroversion-introversion type, you're going to end up with a much more successful study group because you won't have an extrovert sitting there and trying to think out loud and think through the new concept out loud while the introvert's sitting there saying, shut up already. I need to think this through first before I say anything to you. And similarly, the extrovert's going to be sitting there going, why isn't this kid saying anything? I need to be talking this out with them, and they're not even saying anything to me. So if you can get the study groups going where they've got extroverts together and introverts together, you're going to end up with a much more successful group, and they're just going to think in the ways that comes most naturally to them. And they're going to be focused a lot more on the learning versus the communication challenges that they're having. So at an intro level, EI is what's most important, and that's your first character. With study groups at a practice stage, it's more of that JP dichotomy that's most important. Like we talked about earlier, with the different ways that they manage time and how the judges like to separate their work and play, and the perceivers like to combine work and play together. And the judges get overwhelmed by a looming deadline versus the perceivers who are really energized by it. So when you're at a practice stage with assignments, it's really great to get the similar J and P preferences together. And a lot of times you'll be able to see this and notice it on the playground in the ways that the kids play, or you'll be able to learn more about it as you're talking about how kids act in the classroom. So a lot of times your kids will have a really good idea of who thinks the same way that they do from a judging versus a perceiving perspective. And that can be really effective with knowledge practice. If you've got a judging and a perceiving kid, it'll be really interesting for you to watch the different ways in which those study groups react. And on Kidsmet, we've got the free personality profile that anybody can take. So if you want to get it profiled for for your kids' friends, you're more than welcome to. We've also got a free teacher account. And what that free teacher account does is it really identifies all of the kids in the class and how all of those kids think, so that that way the teacher can recommend study groups that might work outside of the classroom as well. And then at a growth stage, or what I like to call a growth stage, or what is often known as a long-term project stage, and when your kids are really ready to get to know all sides of that education elephant, you want to seek out other kids with the opposite preferences. So, you know, make sure that you've got sensors and intuitives and thinkers and feelers all in the group together, because as they're talking through things, they're going to get a much better sense of what that concept is all about. And just the same way that we do in business, when you've got all of those different personalities working together, you're able to play to all of the personality strengths and really start to identify which pieces of each assignment the kids are going to be able to take on and really thrive with and really be successful with. So knowing what you'll